sort of showing it. But Ano, tell us the name of the book.
The name of the book is Playing with Fire, Tales of Duality.
What an interesting title. There's going to be a really interesting conversation around that. So welcome. I'm just going to sort of do a little bit of the housekeeping here, which is what I always do at the beginning of the show. So this is a live broadcast, and we'd love to have you engage with us and join in. There's a few ways in which you can join us. You can give me a call on my mobile. I'm going to give you the number. It's 07506 319 745. That's +44 if you're calling from outside the UK. 7506 319 745. And you can always get me on call me on WhatsApp if you want to save carrier charges. The other ways that you can get us is that we're sort of streaming on multiple platforms, and my team will be scanning those various platforms, so Facebook, YouTube, and I think we're on Periscope as well. Not quite sure if we're streaming live on LinkedIn yet. I keep asking that every week, but I'm going to nail my team down tomorrow after this show. But it'd be lovely to have your thoughts and comments and join us with Ano, and as we talk through the issues around addiction, recovery, and general life. So Ano, welcome to the Wellbeing Show. Really good to have you here. How are things going for you? How have they been during the sort of pandemic, the lockdown, and as we've come back into normality? How are you finding things?
Firstly, can I just thank you for the invite onto the show? It's quite I feel quite honoured to be on it, and also to James for sorting out all the technical stuff, because it's not easy. So thanks for that. To be honest, it's been turbulent times for everybody, and some people more than others. And I kind of view it like I've just been through the rapids in a river and tried to just keep my head above water. It's new to everybody, and I think on the whole, I would say myself and as a family, we've managed okay, and I think the isolation has probably bothered us more than anything. Not being able to travel, not being able to go and see my wife's family, not seeing my own mother for a while. That kind of thing has been the main thing. And I suppose I'm just grateful, really, that we've got, things like WhatsApp and, other ways of communicating.
Sure. And because you have, I suppose, additional special needs. I mean, let's talk about why you're being anonymous, maybe, just to clear that up for people who maybe don't understand that, because it links to the sort of special needs that I was going to talk to you about, and how you've maintained your sort of recovery during these odd times, which I think will be an interesting conversation. But first, why are you being anonymous? Why are you hiding your face and not telling us your real name? What's going on there?
Well, I think there are a few reasons, to be honest. When I started writing the book with Sophie, I want to just acknowledge Sophie Amber Wells, because she helped me a lot. She was initially started as a ghostwriter, but we felt that because she did such a great job of the writing, she needed some recognition for that. So I just wanted to, mention that. But I realized that, I worked in the addiction field when I first got into recovery in the early years, and it didn't work out for me. I was too raw and a bit sensitive, and I really wasn't ready for it, to be honest. So when I wrote the book, I felt like I didn't want to, it wasn't about me building a career on the basis of my experience at all. I've not done that. In fact, I've built a totally separate career and a separate life outside of that whole arena, if you like, and I really didn't want this part of my life where I've been quite successful in a different kind of career, and you know, I run a multi-award winning business. I have a lot of customers from all walks of life that don't know my background, don't know anything about it. They just know me as who I am and what I do within my profession. And I really didn't want that crossover, but I felt like I had a story to tell. And that was the motive for writing the book. It was never about the money at all. It was about the need for this story to be told. So that was one reason, was that I wanted to keep my identity within the world that I've created in my recovery separate. And also some of the things that I've written in the book, you know, that relate to my experience within 12-step recovery and the fellowships, which I won't mention by name, but, you know, because I wanted to kind of respect the tradition of anonymity within that, and not try and just respect the traditions that are connected to those fellowships, you like. And then there was also the fact that, you know, there's some pretty hardcore stuff I've written in that in relation to crime. Yeah. And, you know, I really felt that I needed to be careful with that, in a sense, not just for me, but for the other people that I was talking about. You know, all the names in the book have been changed. The characters, they've all been given different names, including my own family. So right. the only person I really name is my baby Benjamin. And to be honest with you, if somebody really wanted to find out who I was, I mean, you wouldn't have to be a rocket scientist. You could go and dig away and probably find a connection with it somewhere. But on the face of it, I just didn't want that kind of recognition.
So, I mean, there's a lot of thought gone into it then. It's not just some sort of weird gimmick. I'm sort of thinking on there's a couple of things, because we talked, as I always do, with my guests. We have a conversation before the show, and I mainly to give people an opportunity to escape me if they can't stand me, and that's fine. I could understand that if somebody would say like, oh no, I don't want to be on a show with that nutter. That's fine. But we did talk about this issue. We talked at some length. I mean, then we spent almost an hour because I got on my soapbox about it all. So I'll try not to get on my soapbox this evening. But there's a couple of things that we did talk about. One was the notion of how this recovery industry has grown, and some of the blurred boundaries between people in recovery and people then marketizing and monetizing recovery processes, and then sort of transferring that into outside of meetings, which are essentially free. Meetings are essentially an amateur free activity. And then also this sort of tradition thing, which people may not have come across. So I'm just going to sort of give a little bit of information around that. In what's known as 12-step recovery, which some people may have heard of in those terms, but they're more likely to have heard something AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. So all the anonymous fellowships, they also Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, etc. They have this word anonymous in their name. That's what identifies them. And it identifies that not only the 12-step organizations, but they're also 12 tradition organizations. So 12 steps, 12 traditions. And the tradition that the anonymous refers to is, I think I'm correct, it's tradition 12. Is that correct? Am I remembering it?
That's correct.
Tradition 12, yeah, and tradition 12 says something, I don't know the exact wording, but anonymity is the core of the healing process. And it is the core of the healing process for a number of things, for a number of reasons. One being something that you've mentioned about removing personal ego from that process. So, and also trying to protect method of helping people from commercial exploitation is another big part of it, because of course if there are no bigwigs in 12-step 12 tradition recovery, then they can't commercialize it, they can't marketize it. But nevertheless, despite that, we are seeing the marketization of 12-step 12 tradition recovery. So that's the background and the context. And I hope did I make that clear enough, do you think, Ano?
I think, yeah, I mean, it was clear enough to me. And, you know, I think that it can get a bit blurry, the boundaries for some people. Personally, I mean, I don't really want to get into a lot of opinions about that particular thing, but I just know for me, I didn't want to establish myself as a professional recovery person, because, you know, I'm, you know, neither am I floating about on a bed of spirituality. I'm as flawed as the next guy, you know. But I just felt that I mainly want to protect the life that I've got now.
Yes.
I don't need. I mean, I've got all the recognition I need within my career. You know, you know, it's an award-winning business. It's a multinational award-winning business. It's, you know, we're very good at what we do. So I really don't need the recognition in that respect.
Yeah.
But I think there was a part of me that felt that I needed recognition around the story and my life, and particularly what I'd experienced.
Sure.
And I think that's what it was that I wanted to be heard, you know, more than about anything else. And as for my ego, I mean, we've all got egos, and we've all got to contend with them sometimes and try and, you know, just try our best, for me anyway, to try and maintain a bit of humility within what I do, because, you know, it can get pretty ugly. I mean, raving egos are pretty ugly, isn't it? You know, and so, yeah, they were my main reasons.
Okay. It's interesting that you say, for me, it's interesting. And I'm talking as a clinician in the field, sort of primarily. But I'm also in recovery myself. I go to 12-step meetings, and I'm not necessarily going to name which ones I go to, but I go to quite a lot of them from a lot of different fellowships. So there you go. Yeah. I'm greedy in everything I do, to be honest. Well, you know, that's the way it is. And I've also found that my life isn't simple, and the solutions I need are, you know, they may well be simple in one way, but actually they are multi-layered, and the sort of support I need is multi-layered as well. And I'm very grateful for all of that stuff. But I suppose, primarily coming at it from, you know, the position of an informed clinician, informed by personal experience. One of the things that's interesting for me in what you're talking about, well, there's a lot of interesting things, but two of the things that really strike me are the fact that in your early days of recovery, you went into the recovery field, and you found that I'd like to talk with you more about that experience, if that's okay. And also the thing. Oh, the second one is just, I've forgotten it. Let's go with the first one.
Right.
And they come back to me. So, well, tell me about that, because I see that happen to a lot of people in early recovery, that they end up somehow in the recovery industry, making money of it. So, what was your experience?
Well, it's a really good question, to be honest, and I think this happens to a lot of people, because for me, I'd come to the tail end of a relapse that had lasted 10 years. And I hadn't died. I thought I was going to die, but I didn't. And I, you know, had been suicidal through that. I'd been in intensive care units, psychiatric wards, blah, blah, blah. And I got to the end and went into a rehab again. Yeah. And I knew that for me, the only thing that had worked for me before was 12-step recovery. So in me somewhere, I knew that's what I needed. So I'd ended back in, to cut a long story short, as I started to get well and recover, and I spent nearly a year in treatment. I did a primary and then a secondary where we kind of went into my underlying issues, which involved a lot of trauma and a lot of abuse and things like this. And as I came to the end of that and I started to think about what it is that I wanted to do with my life now that I finished my commitment to doing all this. And, you know, I had a criminal record as long as your arm. I was a petty thief, and a lot of my convictions were for possession of controlled substance of one sort or another. Some of them, the amounts were laughable, and it cost them, must have cost, you know, the police and the authority hundreds of pounds over something that might have been worth £2 on some instances. Just to be honest, I look at it now and I think it's ridiculous. But you know, I was a chronic thief. I was a shoplifter, so I didn't feel I had anywhere to go with that. That I had any chance of anyone employing me. So I looked at those few people that were ahead of me, and some of them had gone into the treatment field, and I thought that maybe I could use my experience then in a resourceful way. So and I thought it was the only thing that I could do, because I didn't feel I had a chance at anything else. And so I went from there into the education around it and getting some experience and qualifications whilst I was doing voluntary work.
Right.
You know, and then ended up working initially in the rehab that I'd been through, and then eventually as a substance misuse homeless worker for an organisation in the north.
I mean, it's fascinating in a way. I don't know of any other area of mental health work where you could end up being employed by the hospital or treatment centre that provided your treatment. It's not a usual state of affairs across the mental health field. I reflect upon it. I find it interesting. How long ago was this, Ano, that was going on for you?
Well, that was, I went into rehab nearly 20 years ago. So that would have been about 17 years ago that I actually stepped back into the environment which I had initially been a client in. And you're right. I mean, it was difficult. It was challenging for me, even to separate myself from the clients and see what was going on the other side of the door was quite, and then being within group therapy situations, I'd find it really challenging because I'd be there trying to practice being a therapist at the same time as really identifying with the client. And I really struggled not to take that on. And I think really I wasn't ready for it at all. I reflect on it now and see that.
Did you qualify as a therapist? Did you get qualifications as it?
I qualified, yeah.
Right. Which is unusual, actually, in my experience.
Well,
people to get the qualifications.
Well, I mean, some people do and some people don't. I think some people work as workers within rehabs, and some people actually work as a therapist. I mean, a few of my friends are still working in the field now that went through that treatment centre. Right. They ended up working there and then moved on into other areas and are still working within the field now, 20 odd years down the line. And they're good therapists.
Yeah, I have no doubt.
They really are.
Yeah, I'm not.
But I think for me, I was too raw. I I was absorbing everything. I was like a sponge, and I really was not able to continue doing that. It was too early, and I was suffering, actually, mentally, really suffering. And look, we hear stories of people getting into that. And, I've known, a few a lot over the years that have actually taken their own lives or ended up relapsing through the pressure of that kind of thing, and they've ended up dead.
Yeah. I mean, again, addiction treatment is one of those interesting industries where it's almost an entry requirement to provide treatment that you be in recovery yourself. I mean, it's in the addiction world, it would be an odd person who didn't have recovery who was providing treatment.
I think it's seen as a resource, isn't it? It's an extra added awareness that perhaps somebody can bring into the work.
And it may well be, but it also may not be, as you're saying.
No,
it could also be an actual detriment. But there's also something in your story which is, I think, interesting for me as well, which is about you felt that there weren't any other avenues open to you. So in one sense, there was another form of rehabilitation going on for you, which was the rehabilitation into employability.
Yeah, I mean, you come out, you're fresh out of a rehab. Right. All you've got behind you is years and years of addiction and crime, and you think, who's gonna even give me a job? And then you see a doorway that you could walk into something that could be actually a profession.
Yeah.
And like going from a prolific shoplifter into a position like that, it's quite a big thing for an addict in early recovery, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and it's but I mean, for me personally, didn't work out. It wasn't for me, and I think the best thing that ever happened to me was not finishing my probation period in the second job that we got. I was actually asked to leave before I finished that, and at that time, I actually thought my life was over and it was the end of the world, and there was nothing left for me or what I could do. What was I going to do now?
Yeah.
And in fact, it was actually a doorway into a new life and a new career for me, because at the same time as studying that, I was also studying other things.
Right.
I studied fine art, so I was at uni doing that, and carried on doing that, and then walked into a different field of work after that.
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great stuff. It's a great. So the other thing that was, and I remember the second question now. I knew it'd come to me at some point, but there was something you said about as well, which I found an intriguing statement, and I think it's linked to some of the core processes of recovery. That although you wanted to not sort of promote yourself, you had this urge to tell your story in some way. And telling our story, or telling the story of somebody's experience and how they get into recovery, is a sort of core process in a lot of group therapy, but it's very much a core process, I think, in 12-step recovery. Is that right?
Sorry, I was deep in the thought about the recognition thing then as you were speaking, so I apologise for that.
No, that's all right.
Anything
interesting to say, so that's all right.
Yeah, no, I think what it is I recognise, it's right in the book, that the recognition that I was looking for was actually that of somebody that had lived without a father figure in their life for such a long time, throughout a majority of my addiction and throughout the best part of my recovery. Not having so there was like a child in me that really wanted his father to say, do you know what, son, you're doing really well. Do you know what, son, I'm proud of you. Do you know what, son, carry on, and you're doing good. So I recognise that kind of lack, in a sense, was going on for me. But I also felt that I wanted some of the things that I've written in the book to be recognised, because I am a survivor. I am a survivor not only of addiction, alcoholism, but of, childhood abuse.
Yes.
And, it's only, I think I was, so that I felt that needed to be told and acknowledged. But then again, not for me as a personal individual within my own name. That's kind of enough. It's enough for me with the Ano Nimmus. It's a strange thing, but I understand it.
I mean, it's not strange to me at all.
Right.
One of the things that I look at with some sense of detachment, I suppose, but also some interest, a sort of intellectual interest, and I have to have some detachment around it, because otherwise I get a bit too caught up and get on a soapbox about it. But how in the mental health space in general,
Right.
There's been this move into that somehow stories are it. They transform. They are the treatment. They are the therapy. They are everything. And obviously everybody has a story, and I think stories are really important ways of healing. I'm not questioning that at all, but they aren't in and of themselves a clinical intervention into somebody's mental health or mental illness. I mean, they're just not, but they are a useful thing for people to do. Now, they are telling stories is core, sharing stories. It's called experience, strength and hope within the sort of 12-step frame. But they are stories that are told within a particular context, and they're not necessarily told outside of that context. So I would encourage people to do this. There are open meetings of all the 12-step fellowships. And if you want to find out more about them, they're very, very welcoming groups. And I suppose one of the issues we should knock on the head about anonymity, that it means that it's a secret society and some sort of cult. It certainly isn't. As we are discussing, anonymity is a much more complex issue than that. And there are these open groups, and I would encourage people to go and listen to how folk talk about themselves and their lives. It's a real eye-opener, I think. The sort of level of psychological maturity that goes on in these meetings is quite extraordinary. But it is designed, these stories are designed to be used within that context and not outside of them. And for me, it's interesting that you decided to write your story, but using some of the framing and boundaries that exist within those meetings. Were you conscious about doing that? Was that one of the reasons for doing it?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I haven't mentioned yet, I mean, one of the fellowships, I was a representative for it on a world level.
Yeah.
So I represented our fellowship, the UK fellowship, at the World Service conferences for a while. And, I really wanted to respect have some respect and boundaries around that too, because using that to platform as a platform for me as an individual that isn't anonymous, would have been wrong and disrespectful as well. So that was another reason why I did that, because while I was doing that, it opened my world up. I mean, I experienced the fellowship on a worldwide scale and what's going on, in countries where, literature is being translated for, and the fellowships fellowship is being, in its infancy.
Yeah.
So, which was for me quite an awakening. So I just really didn't want to bolt my name onto that within the book, out of respect for fellowship, really.
I get that. I get that. It's also, I think, something is working and it doesn't need fixing by somebody else. So,
Yeah.
like, why would you come along and fix something that doesn't need it? But that aside, I mean, I think coming back to story, because I want to hear your story a bit, if that's okay. And I do want to give folk who might be listening a bit of a trigger warning, because Anna, you already let us know that there are some challenging themes in your story. But one of the things about stories is that it allows somebody else to possibly identify with some of the themes in the story. And maybe also, and this is really important, I think, get some hope that if they're currently in the story and they hear somebody who has a story which is now in the past and they have a different story here and now, it may give that person who's in that story hope that it can change. And
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I think essentially the story is about hope.
Yes.
And redemption, if you like, of a kind, because, but it's a story that needed to be told in full. I mean, to eventually get to that. I mean, a lot of the process within the fellowships is the identification process, which is just, is about connection, really. For me, that disconnection from society and my family and my neighborhood and the people around me was a massive thing within, when I was in active addiction. So the identification process that we get within the fellowships, if you like, when we're telling our stories, I think it's an initial, helps perhaps the newer people get some kind of connection. And therefore give them hope, because that's what I received when I first started attending. After a while, I started to think, well, if he can do it, well, maybe so can I.
Exactly.
I mean, because he looks like a bit of a knob, so I'm a bit of a knob, so why can't I get this too? And excuse the terminology, but
it's really cool. Use whatever term.
Yeah.
Well past the watershed, so.
Right. Okay.
Really okay. We're all adults here, and it's fine.
Right.
So, don't worry about it. James might be a little bit. He's a bit emotionally quite young, James. That's why we don't let him on.
Right. Okay.
Because he's his face is probably going like that or something. But there you go. Mind you, he looks like that most of the time. So.
Right. Plus, he can't answer back, can he?
Well, he can. He might do at some point. He requested to meet for a coffee this weekend. I think it's just actually to punch me, but
right.
That's all right. We'll get through it somehow. So just coming back to the young Ano thing, if you don't mind, maybe we can hear some of your story.
Well, which bit? I mean, because
where does it start? Ano the kid. Where were you born? Where were you brought up? And let's start there, because
okay, because that's not a secret in the book either. And like I said, if somebody really wanted to do some homework on me and research, they could find out who I was, especially in this day and age. Yeah. But I just think
give us any name you want of the place.
Yeah, no, I was born in Hereford.
Okay.
I don't have an issue with that. What I'm trying to say is I don't want to get overly ridiculous around the whole Ano Nimmus thing, but it's something that I needed to do. You know what I mean? It's
I totally respect it.
Yeah. Okay. So I was born in Hereford in the mid '60s.
Yeah.
My mother, I didn't know who my real father was, nor did my mother. It was like one of these one night stands. I was going to go up for adoption. That was the plan for me, and that was all in preparation. It was just about paperwork. And the story goes that I was born, and the moment my mum and my grandfather laid eyes on me, they couldn't go ahead with that, and so I was kept and taken back to a house or a bungalow, in fact, a prefabricated bungalow made of tin. It was put up during or just after the war.
Yeah.
And my mum lived there with my grandparents and my auntie and my uncle. And that was, you know, where it all began, my life.
And what's the next bit of the memory? What's the next bit of the memory?
Right, okay. So I remember being quite a happy child. I was, you know, quite loved and looked after. Played a lot of in my grand's garden. I've got some really early memories there. Experiencing, you know, things like seeing butterflies and things like this. Climbing, wanting to climb trees. Told not to climb up the lilac tree and this kind of thing. So,
and did you climb up the lilac tree?
Of course, I climbed up the lilac tree all the time.
I'm glad to hear that.
That's where it all began. You know,
I'm glad you climbed that lilac tree.
Yeah,
it needed climbing. Do you know?
Yeah.
Desperately asking to be climbed by you.
It was speaking to me. So my mum then married a guy in the SAS. Had a baby, another my
Hereford. Why?
Yeah.
Really?
So
what sort of age were you then?
I was 2 when I was adopted. That's on my, you know, on my adoption certificate.
So you were adopted?
I was adopted, yeah.
By this guy who married
By this guy, yeah.
Not into a strange family. Because so far, you know, I have to say, if I would sort of, if you don't mind me reflecting back to you, it's a very loving story.
Well, it was quite.
It's really quite beautiful, actually.
Quite a normal thing, and yeah, it was. I mean, you know, the memories I've got of being a really young baby, that you know, it amazes me. But I've got that I can remember them. You know, crawling about on the floor, a tin spinning top. You know, I don't know if you ever remember them things, but you push them up and down and they would spin.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know,
maybe you can get hold of one, but yeah, we used to throw them around. They're worth nothing. Yeah,
those kind of things. You know, so life was pretty normal, really. 2 brothers.
Okay.
You know, stepfather left the army. And we moved up north. I can remember moving on my first days at school, running away from school. I was quite a curious child. You know, I remember there's a story, and I remember parts of this. I was probably about 3.5 years old, where I left the flat which I lived in the middle of Hereford, and managed to go up to the bus station, jump on a bus to my grandmother's, and got there at such a, you know, I was just a baby, really.
So I was going to say, what age were you?
Yeah, 3.5. Okay. And it was like the other side of the town, you know.
Yes, brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
You know, and so, you know, yeah, you know, so. And, you know, we moved, and yeah, I've got some really good memories of childhood. Really good memories. Yeah.
And you moved up north as a family, so you, your 2 brothers, your dad, your mum, and your dad had been in the SAS, so inevitably, you know, I'm a therapist, I'm going to ask those questions. So,
yeah,
how was his functioning? I mean, sort of.
Well, I mean, he was quite a secretive man in relation to what he did in the army, and I think he was still attached to the army, to the SAS in some way.
Yeah.
But he was also, I think he joined the territorial army then, because it was part-time, and he had a profession in electronic engineering, because he was a really intelligent man.
Yeah.
You know, some of his hobbies were astrophysics and things like that. And, you know, so
It sounds like you liked him.
I admired him.
Right.
There were parts of me, you know, you're talking about a really strong, powerful, resourceful guy that was trying to teach us to be little soldiers in a way.
Yeah.
And some of that stuff I found really useful, you know, as I've grown up, and I recognize it as I get older. You know, where some of this determination comes from, and some of this, you know, drive, if you like, you know, because yeah, just I mean, I think I climbed Snowdon and Ben Nevis by the time I was 13.
I was going to say,
You
you
know,
didn't do that when you're 4.
no, I didn't do that one as well. But you know, those were the kind of things that,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know, he was into mountain climbing, and that was his hobby. So you know,
I mean, that's the truth about the armed forces is it can instill in people some amazing things.
yeah,
And I you know, I've met, you know, lots of people who've been in the armed forces or children of people in the armed forces. I think about a friend of mine who had, whose dad was also in the SAS, but unfortunately her dad was a psychopath and went out to date.
right.
And left them highly damaged. But your dad wasn't. He doesn't sound that he was that damaged by it.
Right. I'm just painting one aspect of the picture.
Okay.
I've only recognised recently that he was suffering from PTSD. I mean, there was no doubt about that.
I thought that's where we were going.
Yeah, I didn't get onto that. I'd done the fact that the family historical connections and work around that, and
Yeah.
you know, the generational thing, you know, because he grew up in the slums of Liverpool. It was, you know, from Irish beginnings.
Yeah.
And, you know, Scotland Road then was, you know, a lot of the slums were there. And I think there was 7 or 8 kids in the family. Father was a heavy drinker, stroke alcoholic. You know, there was violence within the household.
Yeah.
And that went back another generation and another generation. So, you know, his way of escaping that or getting out of that was to join the army.
And it has been and will be for many generations of kids.
Yeah. And there he was trained to be a killer.
Yeah.
Which, you know.
Not just any killer. We have to understand that the SAS is the elite. I mean, without a doubt.
Yeah.
So he was an extremely talented man.
Yeah, I mean, it's not
very driven.
Yeah, and you know, yeah, I mean, you know, he'd been shot.
Yeah.
He'd done term served in Aden and in Ireland, Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
You know, some of his best friends within his group, if you like, were actually my brother's godfathers. They were the first people into the Iranian embassy when the siege went on. Yeah. They were the ones that went through on the abseil road first in. So, you know, they were that was the kind of environment he'd been in, and he was still connected to these people, even though he wasn't in. You know, they were his friends. So.
I'm not quite sure you ever leave that regiment, to be honest.
Right.
Sort of in practical and very definitely in emotional, psychological terms.
So I admired that greatly. You know, it was something I was really proud of as a kid, to be honest. It was like, you know, but there was this other side of him that was just a bit of a rageaholic.
Yeah.
You know, violent. You know, and there was a lot of physical violence in the house and cruelty, really.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was suffered a lot of physical abuse through being hit, you know, and psychologically, I mean, you know, it's like sometimes I'd be grounded for like 3 or 6 months at a time. But,
He was the guy who was hitting you.
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
You know, but that it wasn't just me. It was, you know, obviously my brothers, and sometimes, you know, my mother would get it, and you know, alcohol would be involved, and you know, so that started when I recognised that around between 6 and 7 years old.
Sure.
And we then moved from, we were living in a council housing estate in Wales. And we moved up to Chester, to a housing estate in Chester called Blacon, which was a bit rough, but I mean, to us, it was a new world. And, you know, that I go into some detail about all this in the book. You know, I went to my high school there. I got into some of my hobbies and things, and you know, I really, you know, a bit later on than that, my drugs use started to take off. There was an epidemic of heroin at the time coming from Liverpool and Birkenhead, and the overflow was coming into Chester, and, you know, so it was rife, if you like.
And I guess at this point, you yourself would have been experiencing significant trauma.
Yeah, but I didn't recognize it as that. Obviously, I wouldn't. I was just a damaged kid.
Your dad wouldn't have recognized it as trauma anyway. I mean, he would.
No, there's nothing wrong with him.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Partly background, partly training, partly pride, ego, arrogance. There's nothing wrong with him. But I don't believe that. I think deep inside him, some way, he must have known that he was crossing lines.
Yeah, I don't know. Can't answer that. Maybe.
No.
I mean, it's just fascinating, isn't it? That, you know, this story that you have of this very, very beautiful early years. I mean, sort of, you were definitely a love child. I mean, it was without name.
Yeah.
Your mum fell in love with you the moment she saw you, having decided she didn't give you up. I mean, what an extraordinary story that is. That, you know, and then this happens, this next bit of your childhood. And those estates, for people who don't understand them, they're hard work, those estates. I grew up, my second half of my childhood, I grew up on what was at the time Europe's biggest council estate in Birmingham.
Right.
I mean, it was just psychopath central. It was just damaged people. Really,
sorry, really. I'm not laughing. I'm laughing in recognition, really, because
you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Psychopath Central answered up quite well. You know,
it was that was the qualification as you left the estate, that you were sociopathic, damaged, and that was it. You know, that's what was going to happen, whether you were that when you came in. That's what happened when you left. And so you recognise that's a similar experience for you. And so what sort of age do you think it was that you discovered these things called drugs that could alter your affect, your feeling about yourself?
I mean, I first experienced all that mood altering thing when I was like probably 11 or 12. There's this big story about how I got drunk. We had a bar in the house, and myself and my brother used to go behind it and drink caps full of whiskey. And, you know, I overdid it one day and started to profess my undying love for my godfather's new fiance. How I wanted to marry her and all this. And like, couldn't get on my bicycle, and I made a right fool of myself. And so I learned then, and I felt like pretty superhuman. You know, the way I felt was pretty, all the fear went away, you see, all the anxiety. And I felt like I just wanted to be nice to people. And but I made myself really ill. And I remember saying to my mum then, I'm never going to drink again. And I meant it.
I'm sure you did.
I meant it.
I'm not laughing at you. This is identity.
Yeah. So then, and I think after that, you know, it was, my dad used to keep this solvent at the back of the car that he used to clean electronic boards, and I liked the smell of it. And one day I sprayed it on my sleeve and smelled it, sniffed it, if you like, and I was smelling it really because I like the smell of it. And then obviously I started to feel intoxicated from that, and I was off with that then. So, and it took me away from everything, so yeah. And then on it went and on it went and on it went. I mean, there were drugs within the estate, all the local lads were grouping together and smoking dope. It was quite the norm, to be honest. And like I said, then we had the epidemic come in of the heroin use.
And it was people don't understand just how much there was and how cheap it was. And it was like dealers were giving it away free to get you hooked because they knew they'd recoup the money and all that sort of stuff. So it was horrific, all of that, when the Brown came in. It's interesting. I remember working with kids in gangs and stuff like that in South London. This is going back a while, when I was doing street level work. And they used to say, well, weed is cheaper than a loaf of bread. And it was, and drugs were, and that it was, easier to get than food, to be honest. And why would you bother with food? Was that something similar? Is that, again, an experience you recognise?
I do, but it was more progressively got to that kind of thing. I mean, it was... Look, the first dealer I bought, I was so intrigued with it before I even took it because some of the older lads were taking it and they all looked like they were like rock stars.
Yeah.
I had this thing that they were like rock stars, that there was something deeply undercover about it all, criminal, underworld kind of thing. And to me, it looked really cool. So I was hooked on the idea of that before I took it. And I remember the guy I first bought heroin off. I used to buy cannabis off him, and then he was using something, and he kind of warned me off it. He said, "Oh, you don't want to take this. If you get addicted to it, you'll be in real trouble, and then you blah blah blah." And I said, "Well, can I buy a bit then?" And he said, "Yeah." But that, I mean,
sales technique, make it
impossible. Yeah, exactly.
I'm in a Guy Ritchie film, way.
Yeah. So, and then and it was just available. It was just lots of it, and I did get away from it for a while. So I moved back to Hereford, and
racing cows.
Well, yeah, and I tried to just take other drugs rather than that because I thought that was the problem.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
I thought, if I just don't take heroin, I'll be all right.
If I use cocaine rather than heroin, or if I use barbiturates rather,
Well, it was more like magic mushrooms because they were free. Yeah, so I got into all that. Yeah,
why would they not work?
Yeah, but it's like we were talking about, my childhood and all the, experiencing all the violence and that. There was still an element of me that was experiencing some kind of reprieve from that, if you like, because I started to notice. I mean, I was a bit of a loner, and I. We had some woods and that close to the home when we lived in Wales. And I would go out into the woods on my own and just to play, if you like. And what I recognized now was happening to me is being in that natural environment was actually helping me to... It was kind of a bit healing for me, to be honest. It was an escape. Not only was it an escape, it was a real place where I would become centered again, or in the now, if you like. And it was a safe place to be. And I didn't recognize that then. I was just experiencing it. But it's like when I look back now, knowing what that is, I was experiencing that, and you know,
And it's
so
real. It's not made up, that experience, because we know studies have shown that experience of nature has a shift in our brain similar to, or no, almost exactly the same as meditation, oddly enough.
right,
In particular, as mindful meditation. We get into a mindful state when we're in nature. And we don't really need to be up a mountain to do it. We could be in our local park.
yeah,
As long as we're noticing the space around us. And literally, we shift hemispheres, which is what meditation does. It shifts hemispheric functioning. So it's real. What you're describing is real. And I think it's linked to the title of your book as well, isn't it? About this sort of duality and the here and now. So I'm sure we'll come on to that. We've got enough time, but I want to fast forward the story a little bit because I think it's this is for people who don't know, this is the identification bit. This is the bit where, you know, I let you go on about your story so that people who are listening who maybe are still in it get a sense of this guy is like me. Yeah.
right, okay. Well, look, addiction obviously is a progressive thing. For a lot of people, it gets worse and worse, and that's what happened to me. And a lot of my early like late teens and early 20s, I really didn't want any responsibility. I just wanted to live this life in this other world where everybody else that was in society doing normal things and working that were idiots. I thought they were complete. Why would you want to do that when you can have all this amazing insight that I'm getting, you know? And in some ways, there was an element of truth to that, because I think some of the drugs I was taking were breaking down those a lot of the conditioning and that, and I was seeing things outside of the box. It's just unfortunate that I was an addict and couldn't just experience that for what it was. You know, it was something, went on to something else. But so anyway, at 20,
what do you mean by progressive? It's what?
Well, I mean, just the obsession with it all, and like it becomes from something that you're doing into something that what you're planning your whole life around. Where to me, where it just consumed my life. It was just all that my life was about. I found an identity within it. You know, it was a crazy identity that I was kind of living. I was kind of living this drug smuggling rock star, under cover gangster criminal hippie. All in one. Yeah. Right. Until the drug. Yeah. And like, so, you know, yeah, exactly. And, you know, so, but, you know, just in some ways there was a lot of freedom within that, but in early on, but, you know, it turned into where you're imprisoned. So you're trapped by the very thing that you think you're feeling this freedom from, you know, as you well know yourself. So so at the age of 20, I was given an option to go into rehab or jail. And of course I chose rehab, blindly went into the rehab thing, thinking that if I just can address my heroin problem, I'm going to be okay. Yeah. And I went into a rehab where they were using abstinence-based recovery, 12-step. So that was a shock. I mean, who wants to give up everything? I mean, you know, please at least let me keep. I could have at least a joint at the weekends, or just the odd drink here and there. Do you know what I mean? And like,
just the odd value every now and
then. And like, not only that, I couldn't conceive a life without it. I mean, why? What are you on about? It's like, what? That's not normal. So So, but you know, not only that, I didn't believe it was possible, and like, never mind that I had a problem that was more than just the substance that I was taking, you know.
Yeah.
So, but I think I came round to it the more I started to attend 12-step meetings, and I think some of the truth about myself I was hearing from other people's stories, and it was resonating with me. And the whole denial around everything, it started to all make sense. And it started to, even the abstinence thing made sense, you know, because when I reflected on the truth and reality of the past, there was no denying that, you know, it was quite possible that this little problem that I got was more than just a little problem. Anyway, so cutting a long story short, it worked for me, and I left there and started maintaining that by, you know, attending these recovery meetings.
Right.
So that was round one.
Okay.
Right. So I cleaned up for a bit.
Yeah.
A few years I was doing, you know, what I needed to do in that respect. But then I detached from it all and started, you know, I was in my early 20s. I mean, you know, life had got better for me. I'd got a job, I'd held it down, I'd passed my driving test. Life was on the up and up. I was in a relationship. It was, you know, got into some of my hobbies back, you know, because I'd always been into fishing, but I slowly removed myself from the thing that was working for me, which was, you know, attending the meetings.
And why is that? Why did you do that?
I don't. Do you know? I think what it was for
You're an
me.
intelligent guy, but I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was getting lonely, and I think part of me felt like I was young and that I was missing out on so much. You know, because a lot of people, like, they were going to clubs and they were going to, you know, out dancing, and you know, I was like sat at home with a Chinese watching the telly, and I think, you know, because I mean, I did go out and that, but it was like, you know, my mates that I would be drinking and that, and I think so. There was that, and I lost touch with the reality of what I'd learned about myself, and started to hope that for me, I'd be all right now. I'd be okay.
So were you beginning to feel cured then?
Well, I was beginning to feel that, yeah, because life was, felt like I was more in control of things. You know, a job, you know, that I was holding down, achievement. I think, you know, I'd had some recognition within society, if you like. I was out fishing one day and I'd saved a woman that was drowning in the river in the middle of winter while it was in flood. And so I went in and got her. And the police turned up and made a bit of a fuss about it all. But the next thing I know, I've been put forward for a Royal Humane Society award. So there was this thing with the mayor and this testimonial on Parchment kind of thing. So I'd you know, and then all the newspapers and, you know, that kind of recognition. And I felt like I was, I suppose, normal, you know. And
gradually going to meetings and having.
Well, I stopped attending meetings, and I lost touch with that kind of. Because I think for me, what happens when I attend a meeting, I'm touching base with the reality of who I am.
Yeah.
In that respect, yeah. I mean, essentially, I'm a human being. Yeah. Number one, but I'm kind of.
I'm guessing you are. I'm not seeing you. So.
Yeah. All right.
Presuming your anonymity is not because you're an alien.
No, it's not. No, I'm just.
All right. So I'm going to go with the fact that you're human.
Yeah, I look a lot like you, but
so you
know, but better looking.
That's unfortunate for you.
Yeah. No. So anyway, yeah. So that was it really, and I just lost, and I started to get more bothered about chasing skirt and
Yeah.
putting myself in environments that weren't the safest of me to be in, like old friends that were still smoking weed and that. And I eventually thought I'd be all right to smoke this joint, which I did.
It'll be different this time.
It will. 3 months later, I'm in an intensive care unit.
That's right.
Yeah. My family are called in because the doctors don't think I'm going to make it through the night.
Wow.
And so they're all, yeah, 3 months. 3 months. So I'd gone from thinking.
But it is actually, I mean, there's a serious point here. It's one of the reasons why I think in the UK we resisted abstinence-based treatment for addiction for a long time, because we know that relapses are really hard.
Yeah.
When you've had a period of abstinence, you relapse. What happens, for folks that don't know, is that you start to use at the same levels that you were using and go beyond them when you were using prior to the treatment. But you don't have the same time scale. And that's why it's dangerous. So it might have taken you, it did take you lots of years to get to the point where you were using to the point where a rehab was necessary. And then in your relapse, you do it in 3 months or 3 weeks. I'm coming weeks, so 3 months. Yeah. And that level of using took you many years before that. Your body gradually acclimatizes to it. And this is one of the risks of relapse. And I think it's an important point to make to people.
Well, it does. It kills a lot of people, doesn't it? Because people have come in with no tolerance. They try and do what they used to do before. Next thing, we're burying them. So, you know, it's a really important point, to be honest. I mean,
I think it's also one of the reasons now why we do have abstinence-based approaches and we do it clinically is because the research has been done, and you know, people are worried about the deaths of relapse, but the research shows that people are going to die from using. That's it, and it kills. It's not the relapse that kills; it's the using drugs that kills, and that's what we need to sort of get across to people, that using is what will kill you for a variety of reasons, not just the substance, but the fact that you do dumb stuff.
Yeah, and look, I'm just resorting to my own experience here. It might not be the experience of somebody else, but I know for me, it became something that went from trying to just smoke a joint now and again to putting that needle back in my arm pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
Pretty rapidly. I mean, we're talking a few weeks, and that the job went. The behaviour started to change. I mean, the behaviours had started to change before I picked up, I think. I think that was half the problem.
It's generally where relapse starts. I mean, if you
and the behaviours and that. So it's like, for me, and like, it depends. I mean, a lot of this stuff depends, I suppose, what you believe. But I mean, I read that this kind of thing was a strong possibility based on other people's experience from some of the textbooks. But having experienced it firsthand, now I know. Now I truly know. Yeah. So it's like, so when I came into recovery the second time and into treatment, I knew the game was over.
Yeah.
I knew I needed to, and I didn't even understand how I'd survived it, because it's like I say, I'm a long time dead. I feel like I'm a long time dead. The amount of things I've survived, a lot of it's in the book because it makes good reading, right? Okay. But I don't know how I came. It wasn't through anything I was doing, because I was just in a destructive way of life. It's just, you know, for the, you know, and we haven't got time to get into all the examples of it. But
we don't really need the war stories.
No, we don't. Yeah, you know,
they're in the book. That's
yeah.
fine.
So I was really. What I'm saying is, I knuckled down the second time. I kind of felt I needed to do
Right.
really take this seriously. You know, a lot of people I know are dead. You know, a lot of the characters I write about in the book, and you know, that I've mentioned in the book, I've obviously changed all the names, but I mean, these people were like, some of them were really interesting, really formidable characters. They were, you know, some of them. I mean, one guy I know, had survived Auschwitz.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, and you know, some of these characters, they really are amazing. You know, people in the respect of some of the things they've done, some of the things they've experienced, some of the lines of work they were in. You know, so in a way, I mean, I don't ever look and think that it was a wasted life. I mean, there's been a lot of experience that I can draw on in a lot of different ways. You know, I mean, even just meeting some of these people for the moments or time that I shared with them, you know, some of it was a real privilege, to be honest.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, it's like some of the most eccentric people you can imagine, you know, some of them. Yeah. So,
people know them as well. You know, there are lots of people currently, sadly, but also historically. So great artists that people know who
yeah.
have been struck by addiction. David Bowie. In fact, I know somebody who was 12-stepped by David Bowie in Dublin in the 70s. So there you go. That's an interesting.
Brilliant.
Yeah, there are plenty of people currently who are in recovery, who are very successful in the arts and the sciences, and like yourself, Ano, in the business world as well. You are currently, you know, very successful. So you have round 2 of recovery. Was round 2 it, or did you have round 3?
No, I'm not. I don't think I've got another recovery in me, to be honest. If I'm honest, I don't know I'd survive another. I think if I, you know, had another round with that, it would take me out, or I would take myself out. You know,
and I'm really glad you came back to the world.
Right.
You know,
Thank you.
It's the saddest thing in the world when people die because of their mental illness, and you know, and so it's great that you come back.
You know, you've referred to mental illness a bit, to be honest, and I kind of think I think addiction. I mean, for me, you know, you've got to be mentally ill to keep doing something so self-destructive, right? That's killing you, and carry on doing it. You're not quite. There's something not quite right, yeah. But I was 15 years in recovery when I started to experience real severe symptoms of PTSD.
Yeah,
I didn't know what it was. I just know that I was trying to use the 12-step program around it. It was helping me, but I was still suffering. And, you know, I needed to lean towards other areas to get the help that I needed within the medical profession in relation to my mental health, and thankfully got the help that I needed within that. So I really wanted to mention that because what I realized is when I look back, Noel, is that I was actually suffering for quite a long time. Clean.
I have no doubt you were.
Yeah.
I have absolutely no doubt. I also, you know, I mean, there is a thing about like thinking about this whole thing about addiction, mental health. Where do they lie? I think there's been historically a problem in terms of mainstream addiction treatment, which has misunderstood addiction and saw addiction as a secondary effect of emotional problems. And so if you deal with the emotional problems, the addiction goes away. That's not true. Addiction needs specific primary treatment, and we have those primary treatments. but it usually sits along another primary condition, which has a mental health definition. So I use the two synonymously, but actually there are specific treatments for addiction which need to happen, so you manage and stabilize the addiction, which then allows people, and your story is highlighting it, to then deal with the other clinical mental health issues. And the treatment modalities are not the same, and that's what important.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm getting at. I mean, it wasn't one glove fits everybody, if you like. It was like, you know, I needed that other help that I got, you know.
And do you mind saying what it was that worked for?
Well, I needed prescribing something, and like I turned it away for a long time, for many years, because in my mind I didn't want to use anything. Yeah. You know, so I saw it as you know, it kind of went against my whole abstinence way of thinking.
Which is bizarre, because
it is
a single piece of fellowship literature about this.
Yeah.
It says, if your doctor says take it, take it.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it was Andy, you know, that was saying, don't take it. And I've just blown my anonymity there. There you go. I'm halfway there. So yeah, so I would.
Date of birth. Let's do it all.
No, no. I'll draw the line at that.
Okay, he's got.
I've got. Yeah, all right. So, but yeah, I mean, and I think it's important that I say that, because, you know,
I think it's important that you say, because there's something in World Service as well.
Well, it
you know
helped.
What I mean? Like, I'm going to tease you a little bit, but you must have had your head up your ass about recovery at some point in your life to have had the motivation to go on to do World Service, and because that's not an easy thing to do. That's quite a challenging thing to achieve, and the sort of. But for somebody who is that committed to recovery, particularly what they call an abstinence-based recovery, we had a conversation about the word abstinence. I don't really use it in that context.
Yeah, I don't know whether my head was up my ass or in the clouds, because it was like, well, actually, I've got to be honest, it was a real privilege and honor to do that. Sure. You know, I was elected into that position to kind of serve, if you like.
I'm teasing you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you know, it was like, yeah, I did. I was not committed. I was not married. I didn't have any children. I decided to put that energy into doing this, which is essentially about helping other people.
Yes, absolutely, without a doubt. And my apologies for teasing you. But coming back to the story about you, then eventually you broke down and you accepted this medical help, right?
I did, and you know, people around me helped me.
Break down to get help.
Well, I think what it was is there was part of me that just, maybe it was the shame of thinking, oh, I've got to take something out, or there's something else wrong with me. You know, the core belief of there is something wrong with me, I've carried since my early childhood, when I started to experience the things that I did. So it was like having to overcome that too. But I think
it's also, you know what, it's something unique to all the mental illnesses, this resistance to help. I mean, uniquely, people resist help.
It's just sometimes it's a shame around it. If there's something wrong with me. No,
I think there's a lot of reasons. I'm just interested in yours.
Yeah.
It might help somebody else in terms of identification, because I'm really clear with people, you know.
Yeah.
If you're suffering, you get as much help as you can until the suffering goes away.
Well,
it doesn't matter what the help is.
Well, I got to the point where I was holding these things in my hand, and I was suffering badly. I mean, my mind was just, you know, it was torturous.
It would have been fractured by the trauma.
And I felt like I wanted to die, and I didn't know why. I didn't know why. I mean, I was doing everything that I needed to do. The only thing I could identify is I'd got involved with someone long distance that I'd absolutely fallen for. And I felt so vulnerable within that relationship that it was bringing up all this stuff around.
Well, that makes sense, actually.
Yeah. But attached to that was also this other stuff that you know, about the self, the critical, the self-critical, what
internal voice.
yeah, that was just so loud. I was incapacitated,
Yeah.
crippled me.
Yeah.
But anyway, I remember sitting there and I rang up my sponsor and he said, look, he said, I am sick of watching you suffering. He said, what have you got to lose?
Yeah, exactly.
He said, what have you got to lose? He says, take the fucking things, yeah? And like, you know, and see. And then I rang up another friend of mine in recovery, had been dealing with illness in recovery for a long time. And she said to me, have you ever considered that taking these things could be a recovery-based decision?
Yeah.
And I hadn't once even thought that. And it helped me then to,
Right.
and do you know what I have to say? I mean, the medications helped me immensely, tremendously, along with the other things that I do. You know, and I did have somebody, you know, I was working with a Hoffman teacher at the time. I'd done the whole Hoffman process.
Right.
And she helped me build a framework of acceptance around that and combined it, you know, and now I look back and I think, thank God, because yeah, I suffered a lot, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And it's also, I mean, I think it is an important message to get out there.
Yeah.
Whilst these programs are extremely powerful, they are limited to what they do. And, you know, certainly none of the founders ever claimed that they did anything other than what they said on the tin. And, you know, the founders of AA, for example, are famously quoted for saying, you know, AA is not the answer to everything. It's not even the answer to alcoholism. It's part. Part. And it can only ever be part of, you know. And certainly my understanding of step 2 is that that's what it's about, is that one needs to always be open to incorporating whatever needs to be incorporated into life to stay healthy and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think Bill Wilson did make that pretty clear.
Yeah.
You know, and it's true. And it's like, even for me, I have to.
I don't know if this word abstinence has come to be synonymous with anonymous fellowships, because, and I'm going to, you know, be personal if you don't mind for a while, because I've been in 12-step recovery for, you know, over a decade, and I actually don't think of that abstinence as part of my recovery at all.
Right.
It's not a concept that I use. I mean, the concept I use is powerlessness.
Right.
Powerlessness is a relationship to something that I need to work out.
Which is great that it's open to interpretation, isn't it?
It has to be.
Yeah.
Surely.
Because my experience.
Work, right.
Yeah.
It can't be something given, and abstinence is something given. You know, here's an off-the-shelf thing called abstinence, and I'll give it to you, and then you've got it. I mean, that's nonsense.
Well, it's also what the definition of abstinence is to you. I mean, I was very black and white about it for a long time. Not now. I mean, I had a heart attack 2 years ago, so I've had a stent and some. I have to take medication every day now. Sometimes it's pain medication, and I've had to really open my mind and do some work around acceptance around that. In relation to how I view what abstinence is. So, you know, I think in the beginning, I think for me, it was pretty black and white because I was fresh out of chronic drug use and, you know, injecting anything I could get my hands on. And, do you know what I mean? And it was pretty, but I think I slipped through the net a bit, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's also, when we had this conversation, I'm going to sort of bring in a little bit as sort of, you know, thinking about, you know, medically assisted detox and medically assisted recovery, and which we know that those approaches save lives. The abstinence fascism, and I can only think of it in those terms, is killing people without
I agree. And it's like, you know, we're going to get extremists wherever you are. Personally, I don't subscribe to that. I've never, to be honest, I don't like it at all. You know, I'm not. I think part of my the challenge for me in ongoing recovery is opening my mind to learning more than what I think I already know. You know, so you know, this is, and I've some of that has been a result of like rude awakening, if you like.
Yeah, but recovery is a verb, isn't it? It's not a noun. It's an active process, or it's dead, you know, or you're not.
Yeah.
You're either active in it or you're, you know, there's no such thing as standing still, really.
No. I did want to mention actually as well, because I think it was a pretty strong theme within the book about, for me, you know, I've experienced what I would call spiritual awakening. Yeah. I'm not religious. I mean, I was brought up a Catholic, but I'm not religious. If anything, I'm more atheist within religious kind of doctrine now. But certainly, you know, I've had what I would call, you know, biblical moments that I've experienced. So I won't go into any great depth about now, because we're obviously running out of time soon. But I've gone into some description of them in the book, and also how I opened up psychically. You know, my psychic awareness became, you know, I started to experience stuff that was not of this world, if you like.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, I think what I'm trying to get over is that the book itself covers a lot of ground. It's got a lot of different experience in it. It wasn't just about drug using and 12-step recovery. It covers a lot of ground in relation to my whole life experience.
And just to remind people, the book is called Playing with Fire, Tales of Duality by Ano Nimmus, with Sophie Amber Wells as a collaborator.
Yes.
It does come really, for people who are listening, this book comes really highly recommended. And I think that, you know, just having a chat with you, the author, one of the authors, I mean, you very kindly mentioned Sophie, but folks, genuinely, you're going to get some idea of how interesting this book is, because just from talking to you, Ano, even though I know your real name, I'm still going to call you Ano. I've got some boundaries, all right?
Yes, that's right. Okay.
And people get a sense, I've got a sense of what an interesting person that you are. And you are much more than this story of addiction. But, you know, we have 90 minutes with the show. We don't have as much time as I'd like. In fact, we have more time than my team want to give me, really. They think it's a bit boring, 90 minutes, I think.
Or it flies by, doesn't it?
I think it does.
Yeah, it does. Might be a bit boring for the team, but maybe they just need to open their minds a bit.
Well, I think they do. I'll have a word with Teresa and Jennifer.
Can I also just say, I want to just mention that, you know, one of the great gifts for me in my life and recovery as well has been my baby son, Benjamin. You know, he's 9 months old. He is just a joy, and experiencing fatherhood where I am present as a father is such a beautiful experience on the whole. Take away the nappies and the whinging, yeah?
I was going to say, I mean, it was like, where's the reality?
No, but listen, I was just thinking about, I was just thinking about our connection this morning. I was just in some reflection on it, and I was thinking, you know, the communication that goes on between, because you can't talk, I mean, but there is a kind of communication. It's absolutely beautiful, and it brought me to tears. It was that, you know, and that for me is a gift. It's a gift of all the hard work that recovery can be, because it's not a breeze, let's face it, you know. And so I just wanted to mention that, because the book, I've dedicated the book to him.
Have you?
Yeah, because at the time I didn't know if I was going to be around for him. You know, I'd had the heart attack and blah, blah, blah. And I just wanted to mention my wife, Ollie, who to me is one of the most beautiful people I've ever met. Yeah. She is just an amazing woman.
Premenstrual at the moment, I hear.
She is a bit, but like I said to you, I just laugh at her, at how ridiculous it is, some of the things she's coming out with.
You are so much braver than me. Laughing at a premenstrual woman, you are the bravest person I've ever met.
Well, she laughs.
SAS, mate, you top that.
Yeah, well, I have to say, sometimes she laughs with me because she recognises how ridiculous she's being herself. But I don't want to say any more than that in case.
I wouldn't if I was you.
No.
Dug a big enough hole already. But,
right.
We are actually out of time, which is a bit sad. I mean, it's been wonderful to talk to you. I mean, I've explicitly stayed with certain elements of your story because I think that it's a public service, actually, these types of stories,
right.
Because it can give hope to people. And if you're listening to this and you're worried about your using, you wouldn't do half bad to give AA or NA a call. We'll put the phone numbers, the national helplines up for you. If you don't want to do that, have a chat with your GP. Yeah. Or if you know somebody who has struggled in the same way as you, who seems to have turned their life around, go and have a chat with them. I'm pretty sure there'll be a receptive audience. I suppose my core message to you, if you're struggling either with addiction or just your using issues or some of the other stuff that we talked about, the abuse, the abandonment, the trauma, that go and ask for help and just never stop asking for help until you get it. All right, that's the most important thing. If you take anything away from this evening, we do need to finish there. Like I say, we'll put up some help numbers on the show. I know it's just been a real pleasure to have a chat with you this evening. I'm sure I'll have a chat with you again, and then maybe bring you back in your other guise and talk about some of your life, which isn't about this stuff. But wonderful to have you on the show this evening. Thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks, Noel.
Thank you. I'm going to say goodbye to folks now, and we shall see you next week. And as usual, I haven't memorized who the guest is next week. One day I'll do that, but not today. All right. Good night.